My friend killed a man who was aiming right at me. I was walking point through a jungle so thick with booby traps you could feel it, and I was in the crosshairs of an enemy soldier I couldn't see. My friend saw him. I didn't. The air in the jungle is so thick you can taste it, a cocktail of wet earth, rotting leaves, and the sweet, cloying scent of flowers you'll never see. Every little sound is amplified until it becomes a character in the play of your paranoia. Water dripping from a giant leaf, a mosquito whining in your ear, with the insistence of a tiny engine. Something rustling in the undergrowth that could be a monkey or it could be a man. Your heart pounds like a drum, a frantic, syncopated beat against the symphony of the jungle's unceasing hum. You're trying to find a ghost. A ghost who leaves behind tripwires thin as a lover's hair and sharpened bamboo sticks dipped in feces. A ghost who's watching you from some spider hole or treetop you'll never see until it's way too late. That day, I was the one he was watching. I was 20 years old, a kid from Ohio, walking point for my squad in a place that might as well have been the moon. A North Vietnamese soldier had me zeroed in. He was hidden, patient, a predator in his element, woven into the tapestry of green. And I was just prey, completely unaware, putting one foot in front of the other, my mind a looping reel of immediate concerns, the next 10 feet of trail, the weight of my pack, the sweat stinging my eyes. I was walking right toward the end of my life, and I had no idea, no premonition, no sixth sense, nothing. Just the crushing heat, the 70 pounds of gear that felt like a house on my back, and the next 10 feet of jungle to scan for anything that felt wrong. The only reason I'm here telling you this story is because about 100 feet behind me, my friend, a guy we all called Dutch, saw what I didn't. He saw a flicker of movement where there should have been none, an unnatural shape in the suffocating curtain of leaves, a glint of sun off a rifle that wasn't one of ours. And he acted. He didn't shout a warning. There was no time. He raised his own rifle, and in that single brutal moment, the whole sprawling, insane war boiled down to one simple, terrible truth: kill or be killed. This is what happened in that moment. My name is Jack Callahan. Most guys in country just called me Sonny. I served with Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 26th Infantry, part of the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one. I was in the Republic of Vietnam from late '68 to late '69. I wasn't a hero. I was never a hero. I was just a kid from Ohio who drew an unlucky number in the draft. And I did what I had to do to stay alive and keep my brothers alive. And one of them, he did the same for me, in the most absolute, soul-shattering way you can imagine. Before Vietnam, the only green I knew was peaceful. It was the green of Ohio cornfields in late summer, stretching out to a hazy horizon under a benevolent sun. It was the manicured, predictable green of trimmed lawns in our little town, each blade of grass in its proper place. It was the chalk-lined green of the high school football field on a Friday night, a sacred space where the biggest battles were fought for a few yards of turf and the adoration of girls in the bleachers. It was a good green, a safe green. I was just an ordinary kid. I worked at a gas station after school. The smell of gasoline and oil stuck to my clothes, saving up for a beat-up 1962 Ford Falcon that drank oil and rattled like a tin can full of bolts. But it was mine. It was freedom. I thought my biggest problem was how to ask out Susie Miller without my voice cracking. The war was just something on the nightly news, a place with a funny name, full of grainy, black and white pictures that didn't feel real. It was Walter Cronkite's world, a somber story told for 15 minutes between dinner and homework. Not mine. My world was supposed to be college, maybe studying agriculture, like my dad hoped, a life spent with that familiar, peaceful green. But the draft was a shadow that grew longer and darker with every passing day of our senior year. It was a lottery, and your birthday was your ticket to a game nobody wanted to play. We didn't talk about it much. Not directly. It was a low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of everything. At parties, in the back seats of cars, in the locker room. Then my number came up. It was low. So low, it felt like a death sentence. Low enough that I figured I might as well go on my own terms, or as close to my own terms as I could get. I enlisted. I walked into the recruiter's office, a place that smelled of stale coffee and desperation, and signed the papers. I figured 3 years in the army was better than being drafted for 2. Maybe I'd have a little more say in my own fate. Maybe I'd get to choose my job. That was one of the first of many, many illusions a boy of 18 tells himself. Basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, was a calculated shock to the system. Their whole job was to break you, to strip away the individual named Jack Callahan, and forge a soldier, a numbered cog in a great green machine. The suffocating Georgia heat was just a primer for what was coming, a taste of the furnace. It was a world of screaming drill sergeants whose faces were always an inch from yours, their voices like gravel in a blender. It was a world of push-ups in red clay mud, of learning to break down and rebuild an M16 until you could do it in the dark, your fingers numb and clumsy. You learn to march until your feet are a pulp of raw blisters, to shoot at man-shaped targets and to obey any order, no matter how insane, instantly and without question. You learn that your life, the very breath in your lungs, depends on the guy to your left and the guy to your right. Then came Advanced Infantry Training, AIT. That's where they fine-tune you for the job, and where war starts to feel a little less abstract and a lot more personal. We learned jungle warfare, ambush tactics, how to read a trail like a book. We spent hours in classrooms and in the field learning about the enemy's tools. Booby traps. They showed us pictures and diagrams that made your stomach turn. Punji sticks, sharpened bamboo stakes hidden in pits. Bouncing betties, mines that jumped to waist height before exploding. Tripwires tied to grenades, so simple and so deadly. They told us stories, graphic and terrifying, about guys who weren't paying attention, guys who got careless, guys who came home in a box or didn't come home at all. It was meant to scare us, and it worked. Fear, they said over and over, keeps you sharp. Fear keeps you alive. The flight over was long and surreal. A chartered commercial jet. A Flying Tiger Airlines plane packed with young guys, most of us not even old enough to legally buy a beer, flying to a place we couldn't even imagine. We were loud at first. A plane full of nervous energy, cracking jokes, boasting, a bunch of kids whistling past the graveyard. But as we got closer, a profound quiet fell over the cabin. You'd look out the window and just see this endless, deep, threatening green. But it wasn't the green of Ohio. This was a different green entirely, deeper, darker, and a hell of a lot more intimidating. When the doors of that plane finally opened at Bien Hoa Air Base, the heat hit you like a physical wall, a wet, suffocating heat that carried a smell I'll never forget, a mix of jet fuel, rotting vegetation, charcoal fires, and something else, something foreign and vaguely unsettling. That was the smell of Vietnam. I was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one, an old division with a long, bloody history. Their motto was, "No mission too difficult, no sacrifice too great, duty first." They pinned the famous patch on our fatigues, and just like that, we were part of it. The area we were headed into was Vico Svo, northwest of Saigon, toward the Cambodian border, a place they called War Zone C, and another, more infamous patch of jungle known as the Iron Triangle. It was rugged, unforgiving country, a landscape of triple canopy jungle and steep, muddy hills that was a main infiltration route for the North Vietnamese army. Our job was simple. Our job was to be the tripwire. Our job was to walk through that jungle day after day, find them, or more often, be found by them. Life in the field, or the bush as we all called it, settled into a brutal, monotonous rhythm. Your world shrank to the size of your platoon, about 20 or 30 guys. Your only concerns were immediate and primal, staying dry, eating, keeping your weapon clean, and getting through the next patrol, the next hour, the next step. We carried everything we owned on our backs, a lightweight rucksack, a ruck as we called it, that started to feel like it weighed 1,000 pounds after the first click. It held our sea rations, the canned meals that were our lifeblood. If you got lucky, you could trade a can of the universally hated ham and lima beans for peaches or pound cake. Your ruck also held extra socks, the most valuable currency in a world of constant wetness. A poncho and liner that was your bed and your roof, as much ammo as you could carry, grenades, and water, always water. The heat just sucked it right out of you, leaving you perpetually thirsty and salt-stained. My weapon was the M16. It was light, which was a blessing on long humps, but the early ones we had in '68 were famous for jamming. The rumor was that they were self-cleaning, a lie that got guys killed. You babied that rifle, cleaning it constantly with a toothbrush and whatever scraps of cloth you had, because it was the only real defense you had against the shadows in the trees. Some guys, the bigger guys, carried the M60 machine gun, a beast that could lay down a curtain of fire that was the most beautiful sound in the world when you were on the receiving end of an ambush. Carrying the 60 was a gut-busting job, but you loved the guy who did it when a firefight broke out. It was in those first few miserable weeks in the bush that I met Robert van Leeuwen. Everyone just called him Dutch. He was from Michigan, a couple of years older than me, and he'd been in country for about 3 months. He already had that look the experienced guys get, a little more tired, a little less wide-eyed, a permanent weariness in his eyes that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. He didn't say much at first. You don't make friends easily in the field. You build bonds out of necessity, out of shared misery. You learn to trust the guy who covers you when you take a piss, the guy who remembers to wake you for your turn on watch. Dutch was our M60 gunner for a while, before he switched back to the 16. He was steady, immovable. You could count on him. Our friendship didn't start with a long conversation about our lives back in the world. It started over a shared can of sea ration peaches. On a miserable, rainy afternoon, hunkered down under our ponchos while the jungle wept around us, he just opened a precious can of peaches, split it with his P38 can opener, and handed me half without a word. That was Dutch. A gesture meant more than a paragraph of words. We found out we had the same dark, morbid sense of humor. You had to. It was how you coped. We'd joke about the food, the rain, the leeches, the sheer, mind-numbing absurdity of it all. We'd find little things to stay sane. One time, after a long patrol through leech-infested swamps, we sat on our helmets and burned the fat, blood-filled leeches off our legs with a Zippo, watching them curl and pop like little black fireworks. It was a gruesome, disgusting little ritual, but it was ours. It was a small way to reclaim some control in a world where we had absolutely none. Patrolling was our life. Day in, day out. We'd saddle up at first light and melt into the jungle to make contact with the enemy. There was no front line in Vietnam. The war was 360 degrees. An ambush could come from anywhere, at any time, from the trees above, from a tunnel below, from a farmer who smiled at you an hour before. And walking point was the most nerve-wracking job of all. You're the tip of the spear. The first guy down a new trail, the first to cross a stream, the first to step into a clearing. You're the one who finds the booby traps. The tripwires, thin as spider silk, stretched at ankle height. The pressure release triggers hidden under a loose stone. You learn to walk differently, a slow, shuffling gait. Your eyes never stopping, constantly moving in a figure-8 pattern. Left, right, ground, trees, back again. You're not just looking for a man, you're looking for anything out of place. A patch of disturbed earth, a vine that looks too straight, a broken twig that didn't snap naturally. Your senses are on a razor's edge, cranked up to an impossible degree of sensitivity. I can't even begin to describe the tension. It's a physical thing. It sits in your throat like a stone. Every step is a gamble, a roll of the dice. Your heart is a wild bird trapped in your ribs. You're drenched in sweat, and it's not just from the heat. It's from pure, uncut stress. You feel 1,000 eyes on you, even when there are none. Paranoia becomes a survival trait. You learn to trust that prickling on the back of your neck. Dutch and I had an understanding. When I was on point, he was never far behind. He'd walked it himself. He knew what it was. He kept his interval, but he watched me. Sometimes, on a short break while the squad caught its breath, he'd move up and just tap me on the shoulder. A silent, "You doing okay?" It was enough. We developed a rhythm, a non-verbal communication, born of shared terror and mutual respect. A hand signal, a glance, a slight nod. We were a team. We looked out for each other. That unspoken pact, that brotherhood, is the only thing that makes a lick of sense in the absolute madness of war. When the bullets start flying, you don't fight for a flag or a politician or some grand idea. You fight for the man next to you. In the green hell of the jungle, that was the only creed that mattered, and it was about to be put to the ultimate test. The day it happened started like any other. A grey, overcast morning, the air already thick and wet, clinging to you like a second skin. We were operating out of a small fire support base west of Lai Khe, deep in the jungle of Binh Duong province. The terrain was a nightmare of dense, old-growth jungle that the sun barely touched, even at noon. It was a place of perpetual twilight. The NVA used this area to move men and supplies down from the border. They were ghosts here, and this was their house. The mission was a standard recon in force, a long, looping patrol to sweep a valley that intelligence said was being used as a staging area. There were about 20 of us in the platoon. We'd been in the field for 3 days, and the jungle was doing its work, wearing us down. Everything was damp. Our feet were soaked and pale, starting to show the first signs of immersion foot. Our uniforms were stiff with a crust of dried sweat and mud. I drew point that morning. I remember the platoon sergeant reading out the assignments and my name being called. I didn't feel any special dread, just the usual knot of anxiety in my gut. It was just my turn on the wheel. You do your job. I remember checking my M16, chambering around, slinging bandoliers of extra magazines over my chest until they crisscrossed my torso. We moved out right after the morning stand to. I moved slowly, deliberately, my eyes locked in that constant figure-8 pattern. Left, right, ground, trees, look for the unnatural. A straight line in a world of curves, a dark spot that's too dark. The platoon snaked behind me in a long, staggered file, with Dutch about 30 meters back, just a flicker of movement through the dense foliage. He had his M16 that day. He was always in the first fire team. His job, to back up the point man. For hours, nothing. Just the oppressive, suffocating green. The only sounds were our own muffled movements and the ever-present drone of insects. We took a break around noon, what we called taking a chow. I sat with my back against a massive banyan tree whose roots snaked across the ground like petrified pythons. I gnawed on some dry ham and greasy eggs from a sea rat can, washing it down with warm plastic-tasting water from my canteen. Dutch came and sat nearby, his rifle across his lap. "See anything?" he asked quietly, his voice a low rumble. "Ghosts," I said, my standard answer. "Just ghosts and trees." He nodded, a slow, thoughtful motion. "Keep your eyes open, Sonny. This place gives me the creeps." "This whole country gives me the creeps," I told him, trying for a joke that fell flat. We saddled up again a few minutes later. The barely there trail started to narrow, funneling us into a tight single file. It was like walking through a green tunnel, the canopy so thick it felt like twilight. Perfect ambush country. My gut tightened. I slowed my pace, even more, to a crawl. Every step was a conscious, deliberate decision. Plant your foot, test the ground with your weight, shift your balance, scan, repeat. Sweat poured down my face, running from under my helmet, stinging my eyes. I could feel my heart thumping against my ribs. I came to a small, shallow stream, maybe 10 feet across. A classic danger spot. An ambush waiting to happen. I knelt at the edge, my rifle up, scanning the opposite bank for what felt like an eternity. I scrutinized every leaf, every shadow, every vine. Nothing. Just the gentle gurgle of the water over the rocks. I gave the all-clear hand signal and started to cross, my boots sinking into the soft mud of the bank. As I climbed the bank on the other side, my boots slipping in the slick red clay, I felt it. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a sight. It was a feeling, that primitive animal instinct that screams at you when you're being hunted. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up so fast, it felt like a jolt of electricity. It was the absolute, certain feeling of being watched, assessed, targeted. I froze mid-step, one foot still in the water, the other on the bank, my rifle coming up to my shoulder by pure instinct. My eyes darted frantically across the wall of green in front of me. It was a chaotic tangle of vines, a thick curtain of broad leaves, dark shadows that played tricks on the eyes. I saw absolutely nothing. For a split second, I told myself I was just jumpy, that the paranoia was getting to me. I took another half step, trying to push through the feeling. And that's when the shot rang out. But it wasn't the sharp, distinctive crack of an AK-47 I expected. It was the heavier, deeper boom of an M16, and it came from behind me. For a split second, my brain couldn't process it. I was just utterly confused. Then chaos erupted like a kicked-over anthill. Dutch had opened up, and the rest of the squad instantly joined in, pouring a torrent of automatic fire into that wall of green directly in front of me. Tracers, like angry red hornets, ripped through the leaves, shredding the jungle. I dropped to one knee in the creek, my mind racing, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. I hadn't seen a thing. I hadn't heard a thing. I was a ghost hunter who had missed the ghost. The firefight was over almost as soon as it began. It was a one-sided conversation, a brutal, deafening monologue of our own making. After that first massive volley from our platoon, there was just silence. No return fire, not a single shot, just the ringing in my ears and the acrid, metallic smell of gunpowder hanging heavy in the damp air. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" the platoon sergeant, a grizzled staff sergeant named Miller, yelled. Slowly, reluctantly, the shooting stopped. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break them. I was still crouched in the stream, water soaking through my pants. I looked back, and Dutch was moving toward me, his face a grim, unreadable mask. "You okay, Sonny?" he yelled, his voice strained. "Yeah. What the hell was that? What happened?" He didn't answer. He just gestured with his rifle toward the tree line he'd just annihilated. "Cover me!" He and two other guys moved forward cautiously, sloshing past me toward that wall of green that was now riddled with fresh holes. I scrambled up the bank and got behind a thick tree, my own rifle finally trained on the same area, my hands shaking slightly. They moved slowly, parting the shredded leaves, rifles at the ready. Then one of them called out, his voice tight. "Got him! He's down!" Sergeant Miller and the medic moved up. My legs felt like they were made of jelly as I walked forward, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't resist. They were gathered around a small, natural depression in the ground, perfectly hidden behind a dense clump of bamboo and broad-leafed plants. Lying there was a North Vietnamese army soldier. He was young, no older than me, wearing a simple green uniform and a camouflaged pith helmet. He was so perfectly, so artfully hidden that even now, knowing exactly where he was, it was hard to understand how anyone could have ever spotted him. Beside him lay his rifle, an SKS carbine, a long, wood-stocked weapon. The medic, a guy named Garcia, felt for a pulse, then just shook his head. Dutch's first burst had been lethally accurate. Sergeant Miller turned to Dutch, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "How in the hell did you see him, Dutch?" Dutch shook his head, still breathing hard, the adrenaline slowly draining from his face. "I don't know, Sergeant. I was just watching Sonny cross the stream, and I just caught something. A flicker. The sun is breaking through the canopy a little. It hit his barrel for just a split second. It just looked wrong. It wasn't a shadow. He was aiming right at Sonny, had him dead to rights." The words hit me like a physical punch to the gut. He had me zeroed in. I stared at the fallen soldier, at his still, young face. Then I looked back to where I'd been standing on the creek bank, completely exposed, a perfect, helpless target. He was there the whole time, patient, disciplined, waiting for the perfect shot. He could have taken me out, a clean shot, and no one would have even known where it came from. He would have vanished back into the jungle, another ghost. I looked at Dutch. He wasn't looking at the dead soldier. He was looking at me. There was no triumph in his eyes, no victory, just a profound, bone-deep weariness and something else. Relief. I walked over to him. All the words I knew seemed useless. Thank you felt so ridiculously small, so insulting. You say that when someone holds a door for you, not when they kill a man to save your life. I just clapped him on the shoulder, my hand heavy. Dutch, I started, but my voice trailed off. Strangled in my throat, he just nodded. That short, sharp nod I knew so well. He knew. We stood there for a long moment as the rest of the platoon secured the area, the reality of what just happened settling over us like a shroud. I owed him my life. It was that simple, that absolute, a debt that could never be repaid. He had killed a man to save me. That's combat. It's not about glory or flags or speeches. It's about survival and the brutal, unforgiving mathematics that governs your life. Looking at the young man on the ground, I didn't feel hatred. I felt a hollow, sickening mix of relief and pity. He was a soldier, just like me. His job was to kill me, and Dutch's job was to kill him first. We didn't talk about it again that day. We didn't need to. We just humped our rucks back to the fire base that afternoon. The silence between us heavier than any gear we carried. I was alive because of him, and a young man, a boy my own age, was dead because of me. That was the equation. That was the truth of it, and I knew even then that it would be a weight we'd both have to carry for the rest of our lives. That day changed something between me and Dutch. It wasn't spoken, but it was there. It made our bond unbreakable, but it also cast a long, quiet shadow over it. On patrol, I found myself constantly, almost unconsciously, checking his position, making sure I could see him, and I knew he was doing the same for me. We were each other's guardian angel, in a place where angels were smart enough to be scared to go. The war went on, a relentless grind. The patrols, the ambushes, the firefights, we lost other men. I remember Richie, a cherry, a new guy who'd only been in country for a few weeks. He stepped on a bouncing Betty mine. There was a dull thump, and then a horrifying moment of silence before it shot up and detonated. We called in a medevac, a dust-off, and as they loaded him onto the chopper, we thought he'd make it. We told ourselves he would. A few weeks later, we got word he'd died in a hospital in Japan. Each loss was like a physical blow, chipping a small piece of you away. You grew a callus over your heart, a thick layer of scar tissue, because if you let yourself feel all of it, all the time, you'd break into a million pieces. Dutch and I leaned on each other through it all. We talked more about home, about what we'd do when we finally got back to the world. He had this dream of buying a few acres of land in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, on a lake somewhere, and building a cabin with his own 2 hands. He described it in minute detail, the type of wood, the stone for the fireplace, the view from the porch. I talked about maybe going to college after all, or just getting a simple job working on cars, feeling the satisfying weight of a wrench in my hand instead of a rifle. Making plans for the future was an act of defiance, a prayer. It was our way of saying that this wasn't the end of the story, that there was a life for us beyond the jungle and the fear. As my one-year tour started winding down, I got short, only a few weeks left. It's the most dangerous time for a soldier. You start dreaming of the freedom bird home, and you can get careless, complacent. You start believing you've made it. Dutch, who still had a few months left on his tour, was always on me, a constant, low-key guardian. "Keep your head in the game, Sonny," he'd say, his voice firm. "Don't get stupid now, not now." The day I left, we said our goodbyes at the dusty, windswept helipad on the firebase. It was awkward and inadequate. There are no words for that kind of farewell. We just shook hands, a hard, brief grip. "You stay safe, Dutch," I said, my voice thick. "You too, Sonny," he said, giving me that same short, sharp nod he had that day in the jungle. "Go home, drink a real beer for me." And that was it. I got on the chopper, found a seat on the metal floor, and didn't look back until we were in the air. As it lifted off, kicking up a storm of red dust, I watched him get smaller and smaller until he was just a lone figure, finally swallowed by the endless, indifferent green. Getting home was its own special kind of weird. One day, you're in a war zone where everything is trying to kill you, and less than 48 hours later, you're standing in an airport in San Francisco. The world was so loud, so fast, so normal. People were rushing around, worried about things that seemed so profoundly trivial, so impossibly petty. No one wanted to talk about the war. They didn't know how, and I quickly realized I didn't know how to tell them. How do you explain the feeling of walking point? How do you describe the bond you have with a man who killed for you? The words just don't exist. So, like a lot of vets, I just shut down. I packed it all away in a box in the back of my mind and tried not to open it. I found out a year or so later, through a mutual acquaintance from the platoon, that Dutch made it home. He got his land. He built his cabin. We wrote a few letters back and forth for a while, awkward, stilted things that failed to bridge the gap between his world and mine. We tried to recapture the bond we'd had, but it was forged in a place we had both escaped. The distance grew. Life, as they say, went on. Eventually, the letters just stopped. It's been over 50 years now. I have a family. I have grandchildren. I've lived a full life, a life that was almost cut short in a muddy, insignificant creek half a world away. Not a week goes by, not a single week, that I don't think about that day. I think about that young NVA soldier. I don't know his name, his story, his dreams. In my mind, he's forever young, forever hidden in the leaves. He haunts me, not with anger or fear, but with a profound and lingering sadness. But mostly, I think about Dutch. The debt I owe him is immeasurable. It's a debt written in blood and paid for with a piece of his soul. He gave me the gift of my future, my wife, my kids, my entire life. And in doing so, he took on a burden that I know he carried for the rest of his. That's the brotherhood forged in combat. It's a kind of love story, really, written not in poems or songs, but in shared fear and violent, selfless acts. People who haven't been there, who haven't lived in that world, can't ever really understand that moment. They can't understand the brutal, terrifying clarity of a kill-or-be-killed world. They see the violence, but they don't see the love behind it. They don't see that my friend killed a man not out of hatred for the one in front of him, but out of love for the one behind him. That is the great, terrible paradox of war. It's humanity at its absolute worst, and yet, in those fleeting, desperate moments, It is also humanity at its most selfless. It is a terrible, beautiful, and devastating truth. A truth I've carried with me every single day for 50 years. A truth I owe to my friend, Dutch.